Good morning. I'm Karon, and this is my colleague Ankur Anand, and we're from Microsoft Education.
Morning.
Good morning. We're going to talk about HackSTEM, a program that my team started. But before we start, we get this question all the time, so I'm going to end run it, which is, what is a hacker? Well, we are hackers. Hackers are good things, sometimes. We're not out here to take your bank account. We're not looking to go get kids' data. We're not looking to get Social Security numbers. We're looking at taking existing things and making them better. At Microsoft, we have a program called 1 Week. The entire company shuts down, and people are allowed to work on passion projects. They form self-teams. They think about what they'd like to do. They focus on innovation. They focus on fixing things that are broken or things that they care about. And then they actually compete for prizes. Remember this term hack as a thing that says, take something I have and make it better. And that's actually what Ankur and I have been doing for the last 3 years. Our story began in 2016 when there was the clarion call for STEM education. I am sure most of you had to react to that. And we were super excited when President Obama set up his Office for Innovation and Technology, and the whole country started to think about how coding and STEM could happen in schools. The job market reports were coming out, the jobs were changing. Debbie set us up great to actually tell us that, yes, jobs are changing. There are jobs that exist today that won't exist tomorrow. There are jobs that exist tomorrow that we have no idea what they're going to be and how to prepare our students today. The interesting thing is that everybody said coding was the answer. Go teach your kids to code. And many of you have probably been super successful in bringing coding into your schools. For us, what we saw as STEM was a larger picture. I think of STEM as a smoothie. You actually need all 4 skills, right? You need all 4 vitamins. And what we said is, no, we can't only think about coding. Let's think about STEM holistically. And so our ambition became to modernize STEM education to enable every student on the planet to achieve more. Modernize by introducing 21st century technical skills, skills that they could use and model future jobs and jobs that exist today that could give them experience to think about the world in a real-world context and bring that real world into the schools. And by every student, we wanted to democratize STEM education. Many of you know how expensive it is to start buying computers, let alone beakers, let alone robotics materials. And when you look at this across the board, whether you are in Mississippi or you are in any part of this country, it is expensive to educate our children. And what we see when we look at this globally, it becomes even more dire when we have the disparity between have and have-not schools. We began by actually understanding first what curriculum looked like and did some pretty interesting surveys across the board of what students were learning. And we came up with a thought that divided the future skills into sort of 2 buckets. The first are the things that we always think about, right? Those knowledge academics, literature, history, sciences, math. But we saw this other track, these practical arts, because nobody knew where to stick computer science. Nobody knew where to stick engineering. Oh, we put it in CTE. Oh, well, but is that the same as in the fine arts program? Is that the same as what's happening where engineering would happen? Is that the same what technical education is? In my day, it was typing, automotive shop, home ec. Those electives were what were considered practical arts. This is not about electives anymore. These are core fundamental skills, and depending on who you are as a student and depending on what you want to be when you grow up, the notion about being able to combine the liberal arts or the knowledge academics with these applied skills will either give you some life skills. For example, home ec taught me how to sew. I won't ever wear that apron that I made in middle school, but damn, it did help me to think about how to go from looking at a world of 2D to 3D, because that was my first introduction to thinking about volume and form, right? Who would have thought home ec was going to actually teach me how to work in the world of 3D? But we have students today who have pathways where when you look at what the curriculum are providing, they aren't actually necessarily getting professional skills, or they aren't getting life skills. They're getting this combination. And depending on who you are, you're going to take from both buckets and make those things. So for me, that ability to make that apron learned into me being able to think about 3D, which led me to eventually a professional skill in designing 3D software. But I wouldn't have ever guessed that making an apron would have gotten me there. Now, luckily, I also did take shop, and I learned how to use a hammer and nails. Now, I didn't go into carpentry, but really, it does help me when I look at my home and trying to fix those things. And I ended up with a whole bucket of mandated skills. Those are awesome skills. Someday, I'll figure out when I'm going to use them, and often they pop back up. Nonetheless, when we started to look at this, we saw this gap, that this whole issue of applied skills was being kind of lost in this transition into learning by doing. And we thought learning by doing is really important because you get this kinesthetic relationship with knowledge. So how can I bring that into those other liberal arts or knowledge academics? So we had a pretty interesting idea. Ankur?
So with the mission to modernize and democratize STEM education, how did we start? In the true hackathon, hacker fashion, we hacked our own software. We hacked Excel. So a lot of you are using Excel. Excel has been a go-to tool for analyzing historic data or static data. We put a hole in Excel and started streaming real-time data and real-time visualizations. And we thought, real-time data is where it's at. So this is actually a picture of a hackathon tent. This is the tent where we hacked. What we did was we constructed an anemometer. Anemometer is a device to measure wind speed out of paper cups. We connected those paper cups to an Arduino and pumped real-time wind speed data in Excel. That was the start of hacking STEM. And today we have a template. We are thinking of hacking STEM as a free resource for teachers. All these materials are free. They are written by teachers, for teachers. And all of these are standard aligned lesson plans. They're mapped to NGSS and HT standards. So teachers can take it and plug into their classroom right away. All of these lesson plans also have hands-on activities. You know, there's this revolution happening from learning by listening or learning by memorization to learning by doing. To support teachers through this transition, we started adding these hands-on components to all these activities in the classroom. So we are not changing what teachers are trying to teach in the classroom. We're just changing how they teach it or changing the tools that they're using. And that's why it's another reason why it's called hacking STEM. We're not changing anything. We're just hacking current curriculum. All these lessons, as I said, have hands-on maker activities. The coding part is not a prerequisite, so it's great if your students code. It's great if the teacher is comfortable coding, but we provide those codes on the website to download, and it's already there. So microcontroller codes are available. So that was the start of hacking STEM. In a true hackathon-style fashion, hack your own software and create something that will help teachers through this transition. Okay, next slide. So this is one of the examples of a hacking STEM lesson plan. All of these lesson plans follow the same sort of template. All of them start with a big question. And all of these lesson plans start with teachers introducing students and addressing them as engineers and scientists and solving big problems. So there's a big problem or question that we pose to students. All of these have also got rubrics and learning questions or pre-learning requisites. And teachers take that in the classroom and measure what they learned before this, and then they measure what students have learned post this activity to see the outcome. All of these activities are also mapped to real-world jobs. So for example, for the anemometer, I'm the wind or hydrologist. When I'm building an earthquake seismograph, I become the seismologist or a structural engineer. So students right in middle school are getting this flavor of the skill that they just learned. How does that apply to real world, and what job does that ladder to? All of these also have got a real-world application. So we are dealing with Gen Z right now. And Gen Z is asking us questions that, why am I learning this? There should be a reason for me to learn this or do this. And it has to ladder up to a real-world impact. So during all hacking STEM projects or activities, there's a real-world problem that these kids are solving. They're answering real-world questions, mapping to real-world jobs, and answering or solving real-world problems. And all of these have an analog to digital to data and call to action. So this is an example of our EC unit, or electroconductivity sensor unit. In this unit, our students are hydrologists, and they are measuring TDS, which is total dissolved solids in water. It's one of the measures of water purity, or how polluted the water is. In the market, this sensor costs about $15 to $20. You can actually buy this on Amazon and test how it works. But hacking STEM is also all about breaking the black box and actually understanding how things work. So in a true hacking STEM fashion, students make this sensor. They construct this out of a straw and some wire that costs 11 cents. So instead of a $15 sensor, everyone gets to make one for 11 cents, and then they get real-time data in Excel. But they start in the analog way, build a sensor, get data in Excel, and then the call to action is they go to their nearest stream, they go to their nearest neighborhood, and find out water samples, figure out what their water quality is, what is the impact of human, what's the human footprint on their environment, and figure out and how can they improve their environment. So that's the sort of a classic hacking STEM lesson plan, analog to digital to data, and then the call to action. Let's give you a quick demo.
Yeah, on the data, we should also mention that we take big data sets that are usually free, and then in this case, we apply them, so then these kids are understanding the impact of fertilization over time in the middle of the US. And so we try and give them data that aligns to the concept so that they can actually start working with big data, because that's the other thing that's happening, right? So what we have here is our Machines That Emulate Humans project. Let's go through the steps that a teacher would go through with their students.
Right, so the true analog way, they start always in analog. Students and teachers start by mapping their hand or drawing their hand. So they literally put their hand on paper and then trace their hand to see how their hand is constructed. And then, to understand the anatomy of their hand, they construct a finger out of a boba straw. So this is a milkshake straw. You cut some notches, you put a thread through, and now you have a fully articulated finger. So again, this is all analog.
They do this also by studying their hand, and so there's some pretty interesting fine motor skills that they have to engage with. I don't know how many of you have ever studied how well students use scissors. Not very well. But one of the things that we've learned is that by giving them this straw to build, they actually not only can study their finger, and if you'll notice, if you bend your finger, it bends at the second joint, not at the first. So they have to actually figure out how to do the math to calculate that. They also then, many often put the bones on, but then they also have to think about what the hand itself needs to do, because their task in this case is to either become a prosthetic engineer or design a robotic hand for the astronauts to use in space.
And I want to talk about frustration resistance here. So frustration resistance is a key skill. We also call it patient problem solving. In this era of Amazon Prime and YouTube, you click on a button and things appear. Kids are losing that muscle or that skill. So hacking STEM is also about building that patient problem-solving muscle, because you're using objects that are not using objects that are not made to do this and making them do something. It's hard. I had to cut 100 straws to write the instructions for this. Nobody has been able to do this in the first go. So kids have to try multiple times before they're successful. And that's sort of a thing that we weave through the hacking STEM curriculum.
And it's not that we want them to experience failure. What we teach them is that obviously failure is a first attempt in learning. And so the more and more that we start to get that backed up, the more and more they actually can realize that it's okay if it takes them a while to get to this. The next step?
The next step is to build a sensor. So this is a flex sensor. In market, this costs about $20, but you don't know how it works. This one costs 20 cents, and it's made out of some cardboard, some copper tape, and some wire. Again, we started in analog, they mapped their hand, they built a finger, but now they have a sensor to go in the digital world. And when I connect this sensor to this thing, what you'll see is that I'll be able to control this finger using this sensor. And that's why this unit is called Building Machines That Emulate Humans.
So here's the human, and here's the machine. Now, this is just step one. What we've got is now a sensor controlling a machine, right?
So think of the classroom scenario where every student builds one sensor and one finger. When they come together, a group of 5 students, what they have is the full robotic hand. Can we pull up the demo, please?
So we have that same sensor. We've put the 5 sensors here. We've put a lot of gaffing tape on here because you can imagine our little cardboard sensors aren't very durable. But underneath there are the sensors. And I'm going to put my glove on. We have the same 5 boba straws that the kids made. They're each connected to a servo motor. And then that's connected into an Arduino. The Arduino is then connected into the computer. I want you to know that the kids are doing this. They have no problem doing this. It takes a couple of days over the course of a number of classrooms.
Right. So when Karon moves her hand, she's able to control this robotic hand. So she has built a machine that's emulating humans. So this smoothie, as we said, STEM is a smoothie, contains anatomy, robotics and data science, all in one, all together.
But we're also now reading what my flexion and extension is in Excel. And that's Excel. I know, it's your dad's Excel. It doesn't look like it, but it is, I promise. Now, what's interesting about it is as we worked with educators, they started to tell us that we actually should give them more information. So they wanted actually the XY coordinates, and they also wanted to be able to do different trials to be able to understand what students were doing. And so we don't have any objects here, but pretend this was a pencil. We can start to test fine motor skill versus gross motor skill, and being able to understand the differences as I start to design what this prosthetic or this robotic hand would need to do for the astronauts.
So the question is, what are students learning? They're learning how their hand interacts with the physical world by holding objects of different shapes and sizes. They see what fingers or what part of the hand comes into play. And then the challenge for them, the real world challenge for them, is to go design a prosthetic hand or a robotic arm to do a task. I've seen in classrooms, teachers say, hey, here's a classroom challenge. Design a prosthetic hand or a robotic hand that can pick up a soda can. And with that, we see reinforcements coming in. These straws are not strong enough. They get arthritis really soon. So that they start putting tape behind it. They start hacking the hack. So that's what we call do-it-twice methodology, which is the first time students are learning by doing and following instructions. But the second time, once the skill acquisition happens, they're hacking the hack and applying those skills to solve real-world problems.
So can we have our slides back? So we now have 25 of these projects. They all use the same structure and the same foundation. We have been incredibly fortunate to partner with some amazing companies to actually use their technology. So we partnered with BBC Learning, and we have 4 units on the oceans. We partnered with Lego. We did a series on math tools and the Pythagorean theorem. And most recently, we just partnered with NASA's STEM on Station team and did 8 units on space and living on space. As Ankur said, these are all free. They're all standards aligned, and they're available today for you to use. But that wasn't really where the big learning came from. We also realized we suddenly had a big, huge educator gap. Teachers aren't ready, aren't prepared. You show a teacher who's never had experience with a breadboard, or ask them to start doing coding, or ask them to start using boba straws to do Excel flexion and extension, and we realized we actually had to do some pretty serious professional development. We've done a lot of experimentation, and one of the big moments that we've recently realized is that we could take our 1-week hackathon, and if we trained teachers before they came to the hackathon, we could see whether or not we could have teachers be part of Microsoft's hackathon. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 2 years. We just finished our second one, where we had teachers come in advance, over 100 teachers. They spent 5 days on our campus. They went to PD. After PD, that second week, they joined another 100 and some Microsoft employees, and they spent 3 days hacking lesson plans. And those lesson plans are lesson plans that look like ours. They have some science, some technology, some engineering and math. They all use some kind of big data. They all go from the analog to the digital. And many of them are now starting to think about those next skills. What we saw was super interesting from the educator standpoint is the first thing is they remembered how to be students. They'd kind of forgotten. In their traditional PD, it's just stage on the stage, they check the box and they walk out. But they actually had to learn by doing. The second is that they built some amazing professional learning communities because they got in contact and got to work with teachers from all over the globe. And also that they were able to put those new skills into practice immediately. It wasn't like I sent them off out of the door and said, hey, we'll see you next year, good luck, tell us how it happened in your classroom. The fact that they were able to apply those and get that support, and the support from the Microsoft engineers gave them the confidence and competence to actually build 16 lesson plans in 3 days that use this. And those are actually working prototypes.
Can we pull up the video, please, for the hackathon? We have a quick video that tells this whole story of how teachers came and what they did.
I'm so proud of myself that I did this. I thought that I'm an English teacher only, but I'm an engineer today. Yeah.
English, science, and math teachers from the United Arab Emirates, science and math teachers from Davis, Utah, science and STEM and math teachers from around the Puget Sound. For the last 8 days, 107 amazing educators have been attending a STEM workshop here in Building 33. A workshop requested by their ministers of education, their state superintendent or principal, that gives them professional development clock hours for learning how to bring computational thinking, design, and data science and engineering into their classrooms. This workshop gave them hands-on experience writing code, making sensors, analyzing data, and a chance to work with 3D, while also modeling classroom use of our modern O365 toolset. Our goal? Give these teachers enough skills to hack their own lesson plans or student technologies to modernize and democratize their classroom practice. Our hack? With 5 days of training and partnering our teachers with Microsoft employees, could they come up with new project-based experiences for their students? Could we grow them from teacher to engineer to hacker? First step, set up a hacking boot camp and introduce the teachers to building upon the good ideas of others and hack for good. Second step, recruit hackers to come support the teachers. We crossed our fingers for 10, really hoped for 50, and were blown away that by kickoff we had 136 Microsoft employees volunteer. While the teachers self-organized into teams around their passion for a particular big question, the engineers were introduced to the HackSTEM curriculum. And once they knew what they wanted to build, we held quick pitch sessions where each group got 3 minutes to lay out their idea. And then with a little bit of matchmaking support, the teams were formed, and it was now time to hack.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So those were last year's projects. We have 16 new ones this year, and we can't wait. We've been able to graduate some of those projects. So for example, the brain gong that was modeling concussions is now available on our website. And you can also get a kit for it through Carolina. And so we're pretty excited to see how these awesome ideas that the teachers have had have actually matured, and we're able to help them be shared with other educators around the world. But wait a minute. The new jobs of the futures have changed. And we have new things in here now which aren't accounted for either in the curriculum, which are things like AI and machine learning. How many of your schools have anything that are using in giving your kids access to start working with machine learning or AI? Yeah, that's what we thought. That's what we saw. So our little chart has become way more complicated. And if we thought that we didn't have applied skills for the things like engineering and CS, we aren't really sure how we're going to go get machine learning and AI into the middle of that curriculum as well. I don't think they're going to add night school to 4th grade. And we hear from educators that they've never even used AI. They see the guys on the commercials. They see that it's super cool. It's helping people. But to be able to unpack this and make it real is really challenging. To give you an example, if you look at a data scientist, which is one of the hottest jobs needed in the world right now, there are 4 buckets of skills that you need, basically math and statistics and programming and database, domain knowledge and soft skills. Isn't that awesome that their soft skills are coming back in? And communication and visualization. It all seems doable until you look at what the tool pathways are. If we're going to teach kids Scratch, how do we get them from Scratch through that progression? And where does that happen? Do they have to wait to get to college till they start doing that? We don't think so. So how are we going to now start to engage our students to be able to go forward? So we started to think, well, what would a middle school curriculum look like for data? So we went and found some books and started to look at what kind of visualizations are already being used and what could be out there. And could you start to put in at least once a month a data science lesson plan? And how might that actually form so that you could get that to include IoT, how you could do things like big data and other additional data science. And so in a good hacking sense, we decided to try one of our own. So with our partners, NASA STEM on Station, we invented our first data science and AI and machine learning lesson plan. It's a pretty cool idea. As you probably can imagine, the astronauts' favorite thing to do is look out the window at Earth. And they actually know Earth really well. And having been the archivists of Earth's change over time, they have an amazing archive of images that are actually documenting how the Earth has changed. MIT and the astronauts worked together and wrote a paper that actually showed how the Earth has changed over time, and you can do that by color. Now, if I wanted to explain to kids how this is going to work, to break this down, we actually had to go through almost 3 lesson plans, because I had to come back and start to look at the fundamentals of what you actually have to teach. So to start to talk about color with the computer, I actually have to teach you hexadecimal math. How many of you know how to do base 16 math or have taught base 16 math? Yeah, I didn't see a lot of hands go up there. Probably couldn't imagine that you could use Crayola crayons, translate them into a 6-digit hexadecimal code, and that's how kids actually learn hexadecimal math, is by using Crayola. Thought that was pretty interesting. And now that they know how the computer can actually interpret color, we then started to realize we had to teach them about the biomes. And the minute they had to learn about the biomes, because they had to understand where this stuff was happening, we also then had to teach them about climate change. And by the time they were done, all of these steps, we actually eventually got to Greta and a call for social action and change. But this was really hard. I mean, we're Microsoft, and we got NASA, so we're dealing with rocket scientists here trying to do this, right? And what we learned is that it took a whole village to try and do one lesson plan, right? It also was that there were no teachers, like the teachers we talked to, computer science teachers were like, I don't teach hexadecimal math, I just tell them to use the hex value. So it comes back to the issue that we talked about at the beginning, is that we had to unpack the black box. We had to show the kids what was behind this. The other thing is that teachers don't have the confidence and competence to teach this. We even talked, when we were at ISTE, we got a lot of enthusiasm because this is really one of the first machine learning and AI lesson plans. But what was really interesting is that we actually had to stand up a website to be able to hide all the complications of what actually it takes to pull all these tools together. So the tool set isn't even really ready, right? And then, like I said, we had to actually break it down into 3 different lesson plans so that it would fit and align in with where the curriculum is. And those 3 things don't happen in the same place, or even in the same month in many schools. So how do I change and hack the curriculum so that the kinds of combinations that I want to make that make sense intellectually actually are going to fit with the school schedule? And what are we going to do in terms of how we look at how we cluster what you learn together? It often made sense to me when I was in high school that I got to do American history and American literature at the same moment, because I could understand the implications of what was happening with what was being written. But how are we going to do this when we start to slice and dice this to try and bring in these new skills? And then the last piece, for those of you who know, is that there are the standards. Like, okay, awesome, NGSS. We've been really influenced and are following those profusely. We know that CSTA is there, and we know that 34 states, at least the last time I looked, had adopted it. But what if you don't have CS in your state, or what if you don't have CS standards? And AAAI is just now starting to look at what they're going to do with the artificial intelligence standards for K through 12. And big data and data science, there's a huge interesting conversation happening, but are they talking to the AAAI folks, and are they talking to the CSTA folks? The world has gotten a lot more complicated. We're super excited to be hacking STEM. We think we're onto something really interesting when we think about democratizing STEM education. We think we're onto something interesting when we think about modernizing STEM education. But we need help. We can't do this alone. We can't do this with just a bunch of astronauts and engineers and people on our staff. We need engagement from the schools, from the districts, from the superintendents, from the policymakers, from the educators themselves. And so we're here to invite you to please help us hack the curriculum. Please help us think about what we're going to do in order to change how we're making sure our kids are really future skills ready. And not leave this to a conversation that we start having when they're in college, but looking at how we scaffold them from elementary school so that they become data proficient, so they understand what AI is doing, so they understand what the machine is actually learning, so that they learn at the same time as technology is changing. Thank you very much. We're here all week. We're happy to talk to you.
Thank you.